Hi, I'm Dan, and I'm building one of my projects, Genie Nexus in public. What I'm building is a smart router for LLMs and HTTP requests. With this platform, you are able to send requests to different LLM providers or models based on rules that you create. For HTTP or web requests, it should be possible to alter the destination, payload, and other details of the request. In the previous recording, we created the overview pages and we added the typings with Zod. In this episode, I'm going to try to get the forms created for deployments and the provider so we can really start adding things and making requests. At the beginning of the recording, I start with a clean repository, so I need to install some dependencies. And there is some not 100% functional outcode still there that I need to work around. Next.js took some time building, and now we need to make Next.js listen to a different port than the backend server in order to have them both running. They cannot listen to the same port. In the Next.js configuration, I have a proxy setting that forwards all /API requests to the port of the backend server. That way, Next.js can just query its own URL in the front end and still get the responses from the backend server. But also, authorization for the backend URL is not yet working. The API key is always required, even if authorization is not enabled, as it turns out. So that's something that I need to fix. Finally, with that sorted out, I can get started on the forms for the providers. Those include both the LLM providers, anything that offers an OpenAI compatible chat endpoint basically, or HTTP endpoints. First, I have to build the server-side rendered page that retrieves the selected provider. It will then pass on that provider to the client component that will render the form. There are two options. I can retrieve the provider from the database, server-side, or retrieve it from the supersafe API endpoint that is created automatically. For now, I go for the second option, as the tenant ID and the user ID are automatically validated if I use that endpoint. Every provider has some shared attributes, only the name in this case. I will be setting up a tabbed interface where I will create the form to update the name on the first tab. Other tabs will change depending on the type of provider that is selected. So, for example, an LLM provider has different input requirements than a HTTP provider. The generic form is done. Some part of the recording is missing here because I forgot to unpause OBS. Updating the provider has been implemented. Now, when we are saving, we also need to update the provider that we are rendering so that we see the changes reflected in the UI. Since the client component is not fetching the data itself, this could get tricky. We cannot refresh on the server side, as there is no state here, except for refreshing the page entirely. I eventually went for updating the state in the client component using the data that was sent to save. Now I'm ready to start implementing a form for each type of provider: a LLM/OpenAPI compatible provider, the LLM echo provider, the HTTP echo provider, and the HTTP provider. So there are 4. The static ones are straightforward, while the other 2 need some additional request details. I'm going to start with the static LLM provider. Implementation of the static HTTP proxy provider is pretty straightforward. We can define a body and response headers that are returned when a static proxy is invoked. It can be used for testing, but also to return a specific response when a configured endpoint is requested. Now that the static HTTP provider is implemented, I can implement the other HTTP provider, the proxy. The difference with the static one is that an endpoint is invoked and that response is returned. Response headers and status code can be altered in flight if needed. Last is the LLM provider, but we have no stored data for it in the database yet, so I don't have an example. If you liked the video, please like and subscribe, help me grow the channel.